we're continuing with a preview for World Radio Day, which in fact falls tomorrow. Let's cross to Simphiwe Ncongwane, and he's now at SAFM with Michelle Constant. Sims, a very good morning to you once again. Sims, can you hear me?
Well, a very good morning to you, Libs. Thank you so much for joining us, and a warm welcome to SAFM. We are now at the SAFM studios, which is on the 6th floor of the building. We're still in a conversation, we're still thrusting into the spotlight World Radio Day, which will be commemorated worldwide tomorrow. And today we are on the jet set on SAFM, and I'll be in conversation with the host of that show, Michelle Constant. And I gotta tell you that this is where I started my radio career here in SABC back in 2015, and I've loved radio ever since, and I've worked with Michelle back then. A very good morning to you, Michelle. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
It feels kind of like mayhem. You're speaking to the TV, I'm watching this. Right? I'm looking at our producers over there and thinking, okay, are we going to be able to tell our listeners what's going on? I love it. It's absolutely brilliant.
It's good to see you, Michelle. How are you?
It's absolutely great to see you. You know, we watch you on TV all the time. We're like, yeah, we have our TV screen right here.
There we go. How cool is that?
We always like going, Simphiwe. So for those of our listeners who are wondering who we're talking to, because we are doing this live on this side as well, Simphiwe Ncongwane is SABC's morning live presenter, and it feels like it doesn't feel so strange to have you in the studio.
Right. Yeah, sure, absolutely, because when I worked with you on the jet set back in 2015 and 2016, I was coming to you from the TV center. Our studios are linked, but then we did it in a way that it sounded like we were in the same studio, and I guess it talks to the evolution of technological advancement of radio. And where do you think radio is going, though, as we celebrate World Radio?
Well, radio is going to go even better if you just take that mic over there, because I know you're talking for TV, but I also want you to talk for our lovely presenters as well. Is that good, Zelma? Yeah, you've got to ask Zelma. So where do I think radio is going? Well, maybe we should go back to where radio has come from. I mean, I think that radio is the most extraordinary medium, and I still believe that that many people who work in radio go onto TV because they have a certain skill that is quite different to TV, which I look at yourself as one of those people. But radio has the ability to engage with individuals in a one-on-one process. It also develops, one thing we see here is a massive loyalty. So I can look at a lot of our listeners and I know who they are. We start to develop really intimate relationships, well, too intimate, but certainly intimate relationships with them where we understand what their concerns are. So radio has that ability to really make a difference. And I think it's interesting that the theme this year for World Radio Day is Radio and Peace, because we've seen historically that radio has the ability to cause terrible, terrible wars. I mean, the genocide in Rwanda was sparked, maybe not wholly, but certainly was sparked to a degree by some of the stuff that was being spoken about on radio. So there's a certain responsibility that one has on TV as well, but certainly on radio when one speaks to one's listeners and to our wonderful people.
Yeah, and you're quite right there, Michelle. I mean, you're talking about developing intimate relationships with your listeners, and it's exactly the same thing that Tami Ngubeni earlier on at Metro, because we were in conversation earlier on, was saying that the listeners, they actually feel that they know her, yet they've never actually met her, because that's the intimate relationship. That's the immediacy. That's the beauty of radio, because it speaks of the immediacy. And I want us to talk about the power of radio. So it has got massive reach. It reaches the remotest and the most marginalized people.
So I think a lot about SAFM's listeners. So in our listeners, we have Freddie the truck driver, who is on the road as we speak right now. He's probably hooting. He is a great listener. That's one of our listeners. Then we have, I can think of Kolani, who's in Gqeberha, and he's a student. Then we have Lynn in Port Alfred, who is a retiree. So the diversity of our listeners, both in terms of geography, but also in terms of generations, is critical and makes it a very thin line and difficult line and fantastic line to walk on when you're talking. So what is your responsibility? What are the stories that you cover? In the past, during COVID, we had Prof. Helen Rees on the show every single day, every single Saturday morning for a year. Yeah. And we put her on the show so that we could talk about the idea of what were the questions that people wanted to know about COVID. How could we answer? She probably had to answer the same questions every week. But the point was she gave our listeners the space to raise their queries, raise their concerns, challenge her, and sometimes they did do that, but really open up the space. The other story that we were thinking about when we were preparing for this was we did, for about 6 months, we did a whole series on conflict resolution. Yes. Starting with conflict in the home to conflict at work, looking during COVID at some of the conflicts that were coming out in the workspace, how one dealt with that. Do you have to deal with it in a legal profession, or can you go other ways and deal with it on a one-on-one basis? So I think the role of us, certainly on this show, is to look at solutions. Yeah. It's to shift the lens. So it's not just about talking about the problems, but it's about saying, well, are there ways of looking at the answers? And are there ways of finding answers, or certainly teasing things apart?
You know, Michelle, having said that, I quite enjoyed that interview you've had with Professor Thuli Madonsela a while ago. And, she raised very pertinent points, especially that
She's
nexus.
Amazing.
She is amazing. That nexus between social justice and the Constitution in South Africa. And I suppose it sparks a conversation. Yeah. Well, it should spark a conversation about how then do we hold our public office bearers accountable for, not delivering the basic services that they're supposed to deliver, as enshrined in the Constitution. And how then can public office bearers, discharge their right and their responsibility of ensuring that we have access to opportunities, we have access to resources and the basic delivery of services?
And how do we hold them as civil society and citizens of this country, hold them responsible? I mean, I think we often say, how do they do it? But the question is, how do we do it? What is our role in society? What is our function in society? When we say enough is enough, what does that mean? Does it mean that we go to the polls? There are various ways of responding to that. And I think that certainly in radio, this is one of
This is where radio comes in.
This is where radio
giving the
comes
people
in.
the voice to be voicing such things.
And
because,
to learn.
there's a bit of limitations in terms of accessibility to the other mediums. But radio has got a much bigger reach, as I've mentioned earlier on, in terms of accessibility. Everybody can access radio and voice such issues of national concern.
You know, one of our producers was just saying how her mother absolutely loves radio. And we can see that with our listeners. We can see the diversity of ages. There are people who are 80 who are listening and people who are 25 who are listening. And she was just saying how her mother was freaking out because she couldn't listen to radio because of the load shedding. So they had to go off and get her like a battery charged radio. And the thing is, everybody needs that space to do that and to really participate, to listen, to learn, to participate. And that's what radio is about.
And then in terms of the future of radio, there's emergence of different mediums of radio, like podcasts. Do you think the other new genres of radio, as it were, would threaten traditional radio?
No. I think I think internet radio is fantastic. It will continue. It's amazing. I think podcasts are absolutely incredible, but they're a very different animal to live radio. Okay. Live radio is when Freddie calls in.
Yes.
So that's the difference.
That immediacy element.
I think there's a space for everything oral.
All right. Michelle Constant, great chatting to you.
Always a pleasure.
Welcome to Morning Live. I suppose you can welcome me on SAFM.
Welcome to SAFM. We love having you here.
All right, everybody. There we go. Michelle Constant, the host of the Jet Set on SAFM, which is on right now. We're live on SAFM and as well as Morning Live. Is that TV meets radio kind of vibe as we celebrate World Radio Day tomorrow.